And of course, when I use the word magic, what I mean is things of the natural world that we don't understand yet, and things that have a particular quality to them, where uh, the phenomena, which are all based on experience, but it's experience that transcends the usual everyday sense about space and time. That's the commonality among all psychic experience, that the experience transcends space and time. And in addition, that it says something about the nature of intention, like when you desire something, you have an intention, that seems to be so deeply related to the nature of the physical world that it influences it. So those are the two elements of magic: perceiving through space and time and influencing the physical world.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. I am Bob Nickman. My guest today is Dr. Dean Radin, who is the chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And we're going to be talking to him today about some amazing things. I'll get back to that in a second. Please take the time to check out my website, theexplodinghuman.com, and subscribe for free to my YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. You can listen to the episodes on YouTube also. My sponsor today is HeroSoapCompany.com, H-E-R-O, Soap Company. They make very healthy and fragrant soaps infused with essential oils. They also donate a portion of their profits to helping homeless veterans. So it's a great product, great cause. And if you type in the word exploding on checkout, you will get a discount. Now, back to Dr. Dean Radin. He has been at the Institute of Noetic Sciences for many decades, studying scientifically things that we cannot see, such as mediums, psychics, all kinds of things that he likes to call as real magic, and that is the title of his latest book. He's written a number of books over the years: The Conscious Universe, The Scientific Truth of Psychic Phenomena, and Super Normal Science, Yoga, and the Evidence for Extraordinary Psychic Abilities. And we're going to be talking about what some of the specifics are of what he does there at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And we also get into talking about some other topics such as death and love and God and yoga and meditation, all kinds of things. So I want to thank, before we get started, I want to thank Mark Gober for hooking me up with Dr. Dean Radin. Appreciate that. Mark's podcast, he was a guest of mine, probably the previous one to this, if I'm going to go in order, and which I think I will. So check that out, too. It'll give you a good precursor to what goes on at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. But I'm going to let Dean Radin tell you all about it. This is Dr. Dean Radin. I always suspected, even as a child, that there was more going on.
As did I as a child, as do many children.
So when was your first sort of inkling that there was more as a child? Because I'll tell you mine in a second. After I want to hear yours, because I'm so intrigued with, because I think kids are actually more tapped into that than adults.
Yeah, I can't think of a time when I didn't at least suspect that basically everything that we experience is caused by the mind, or is related to the mind in some way. So I remember thinking as a preteen that basically it's all about mind. No, I have no idea where that came from. I mean, I wasn't reading philosophy when I was 8 years old, but somehow I don't know, I just came in with that.
I think we all are sort of born with this that connection to the source of where we come from, whatever that is. And somehow with, society, it kind of gets distracted, beat out of us to be really strong about it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you my experience, and here's the interesting thing about it to me. I never talked about it with anyone. I kept it to myself because I thought no one's talking about this. I better keep it to myself. I was laying down in the grass. I was looking up at the clouds, and I just started to sort of shift into this. I guess it was a meditative state. I don't know. And I went up into the clouds, and I was part of it. And I felt this vastness and this idea that there's something else going on, that I was privy to it because no one had talked about it, and I better keep it to myself. It's like, and why did I not go to my parents and mention? I was a kid. I was maybe 7, 8.
Kids don't have anything to compare against, so you don't know what's supposed to happen or not. So, yeah.
Yeah. So there was always that feeling, and I know you just wrote a book.
Well, it is from a scientific perspective, looking at what the concept of magic, real magic, is about, and discovering to my own surprise, which was the motivation for writing the book, basically, that science for at least 150 years has been studying the claims of traditional esoteric magic, but avoiding that term like the plague. And so, as I've said before, that if someone had asked me 3 or 4 years ago, was I interested in magic and traditional magic, the answer would be no. I'm a scientist. I don't look at magic. Until I started looking at the esoteric literature both in the East and the West, where it becomes very clear that the practices that are associated with the esoteric traditions are magic. So the analogy here is that our technologies today are an application of the scientific worldview. Magic is a practical application of the esoteric worldview. So magic is, of course, used in fiction all the time, but it really was a practical application of a different way of viewing the nature of reality. And the reason why science gets into the game is because the phenomena that we're talking about today, we would call primarily psychic phenomena. And you can easily study these things in the laboratory, which is what I've been doing for most of my career, and finding that, yeah, these things are real, in which case the stories, of course, that are handed down through history are always distorted and embellished. But the essence of those stories are correct. There is magic.
Many years ago, I got into Gurdjieff and P.D. Ouspensky, and I was reading this stuff, and he was talking about certain artworks that they're not just an artist doing work. They're actually spiritual messages that are tapped into this greater life force, they transcend just people making cool art. There's a message there. And I was fascinated by that there could be such a thing, when I was reading and sort of looking at Sufi dancing, these things that appeared to me to be impossible to pull off. When you watch those people, and it has to be something else. There's no way it can't be something just magical. I guess that's the word.
Yeah. And of course, when I use the word magic, what I mean is things of the natural world that we don't understand yet. And things that have a particular quality to them, where the phenomena, which are all based on experience, but it's experience that transcends the usual everyday sense about space and time. That's the commonality among all psychic experience, that the experience transcends space and time. And in addition, that it says something about the nature of intention, like when you desire something, you have an intention. That seems to be so deeply related to the nature of the physical world that it influences it. So those are the two elements of magic: perceiving through space and time and influencing the physical world.
A lot of times, when I talk to people on this podcast, they'll say, "Yeah, I always knew I was going to do X, Y, or Z." It was never a question. I just knew it. I didn't know how it was going to happen. I just knew that that's what I had to do, whatever it was, art or music or psychology or whatever work that they're doing. They always had an inkling somewhere inside them, and then they decided to not let fear get in the way, or work through the fear and get to the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is sort of the difference between someone who's alive and not quite as alive, someone who's having a near life experience as opposed to an actual life experience.
I like the phrase that Joseph Campbell used, which was to follow your bliss.
Mm-hmm.
So that I have done that, which is why I don't view my work as anything other than play. It's the same thing, which I think is the ideal. But some people don't have it would be irresponsible to do that. So if you have other people that are relying on you for income, and you'd really rather be a motorbike specialist who does flips in the air for a profession, maybe you shouldn't do that, at least until you don't have other responsibilities. So, you follow your bliss when it makes sense to do that, or when you can do that. But certainly don't forget what your bliss is.
Yeah, that's why I always think that it's not a good idea to get married too young and have kids, unless that's your bliss.
Well, unless getting married is your bliss, right?
Yeah,
Some people,
exactly.
their family is their bliss, and then that's like,
Yeah, I mean, I've done a few things in my life that way. It's like the thought was, if I don't do this, because I always like to project into the end of when I'm dying. If I didn't do this, am I going to regret? Is that going to be a regret? Because that is one of the biggest things of people. They ask when they're dying, what is your biggest regret? That I didn't take more chances, that I didn't go for the thing that I loved.
I get that. Yeah.
Now, in your work, I know that you do a lot of experiments with people that are highly psychic and
average people.
And average, yes. And you've the results have shown, from what I can see in the videos that I've watched, that there certainly is a lot of validity to those things.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've lost my train of thought, which is great.
One of the consequences of that is that for people who are not comfortable with statistics and they don't know about how experiments are done and all that, what they want to see is the equivalent of the UFO landing on the White House lawn. They want to see levitation right now, right here. They want to see big stuff. Yeah. I would love to see big stuff too, but it's so rare that while it does happen, I think occasionally, the big stuff, it only happens in a spontaneous way. And when we bring somebody into the lab, we need them to do something right now under conditions that I've set up and do it repeatedly.
Mm-hmm.
And that is much easier to do, but the effects that we then get are much, much smaller.
Yeah.
We have to use statistics. We have to make those kinds of arguments. Scientists are comfortable with that. That's how all science works. But for a layperson, they want the UFO in the White House lawn.
I was noticing, and it was just these very small margins of statistical relevance to the phenomenon you were studying, but it was enough that, and repeatedly enough,
right,
that there was something there.
Yeah.
So, and I think that is important to bring into the scientific world, because it's been marginalized. What you do has been, it's non-academic in a sense. It's not in the universities. It's not talked about in schools. It's talked about in this sort of ethereal way in religious institutions. But it seems like you've taken this idea of spirituality and these other types of connections to this unseen force, and taken it to a place where you can validate it with people who would normally be skeptical.
Well, first of all, it is in the academic world.
Oh, it is? Okay. Well, so much for me.
a dozen universities, probably more, mm-hmm. around the world, where there's a faculty member, usually in the Department of Psychology, who has an interest in this. And so they teach regular psychological topics, but they're also interested in parapsychology. And so students who are in those curricula can do experiments, just like I do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm part of a long lineage of
Oh,
people
okay.
going back
I
about.
thought I had heard you say that you sort of distanced yourself from academics.
No, I was in the academic world. I used
Right.
to do in
No, I
academia.
know. Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's not easy. I mean, you run up against a tension where students are always interested in this, and many of the faculty are as well. But universities are also sensitive about their image. So one of the things that happens is you get a faculty member doing things that's a very high public interest. They tend to attract a lot of media, a lot of attention from the news people and so on. Other academics don't like that too much because of two reasons. One is you're not supposed to shine too brightly because you'll distract from others. The other is that the topic is considered to be controversial. And so one thing I learned about university administrators is that they fear embarrassment more than they fear death. This may be true among administrators anywhere, that they fear embarrassment more than death. But it's particularly true in the academic world because academics is all about ideas. And so if you're presenting an idea that is not particularly popular at the time, and it's not just psychic stuff, all kinds of ideas are taboo in the academic world. And so if you really want to dive in and explore these things, it's a lot easier to do it outside of the academic constraints.
Yeah, that would be a problem because if it's tied to how you're going to look in an academic setting, how the university is going to come off, they're going to put, it's an interesting thing because they're built supposedly to expand knowledge.
Academic freedom as a phrase is the same as reality TV.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like an aspiration, but that's not what actually happens.
So how did the Institute of Noetic Sciences come about?
So we started in 1973 when I was 2 years old.
Oh, okay.
No. We started in 1973 by the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was the Apollo 14 astronaut and the sixth man on the moon. So Edgar was interested in these topics, but of course, as an engineer and a naval captain and an astronaut, he didn't have time to fool around with these things, except he did do an ESP experiment in space, the one and only one that's ever been done on the way to the moon. But more importantly, when he was coming back from the moon to the Earth, he had a mystical experience. It was sparked by looking out of the window, and he had a few minutes not to do anything, and just was looking at as the capsule rotated, you see the Earth, the moon, and the stars again and again. And of course, the kind of brilliance that we can't see here on Earth. And it sparked a sense, as he described it, of a palpable feeling of being one with the universe. Very classic mystical experience. So when he came, it was so shocking to him and so meaningful that when he came back to Earth, he decided to form an institute that would use the tools and techniques of science to try to understand what is that? What is that experience? How do we even begin to understand what it is and what it means and all that? So it turns out that over the years, almost 50 years now, that the Institute has studied every facet you can imagine, from mysticism all the way through psychic experience, through many other more practical areas, all related to this notion of something else is going on here that science has so far not really grabbed onto yet.
That's amazing. Can you imagine being up in space and seeing the Earth from up there? Wow. When I think about that, we're actually not solid. We're floating in space. All of us. We're in this thing, and we're on this planet that's floating in space. There's no real solid thing. There's no such thing, in a sense.
The thing that gets me is that on a warm summer day, you can go outside in shorts and no other protection. And from space, if you look at the envelope of the atmosphere, it is really, really thin.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tiny little thing. And so we are protected from the vacuum of space and the coldness of space, but there's a tiny little thin envelope, and we're exposed to it. We actually are just through the thin layer of the atmosphere exposed to space. We are space people. We don't normally think of it in that way, but that's what we are.
Well, yeah, and I guess in a sense, Earth is a spaceship.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there was anything that you did in experiments that had to do with death. If you've talked with people that have maybe had a death experience and come back, or any experiments in that area. I'm absolutely fascinated by that because I've done some past life regression and hypnosis, and it
Mhm.
was an amazing experience.
So what we've done in terms of the survival area, that's what we would call that general realm, is work with mediums and channelers. And so the thing that you can do with mediums is say, is the information that they're getting from purportedly deceased people, is it validated? Is it correct? Under conditions where they couldn't fake it, like they couldn't look on Google and so on, figure out things. And the answer there is yes. There have been double and triple blind experiments with mediums where they don't interact with the clients directly at all, and they still get information that you can verify as being correct. What is not known, and this is a long-term problem within our field, is what's called the source of psi. So psi is the psychic experience or the medium experience. You don't know what the source of that information is. From the medium's perspective, their experience is that they're talking to a dead person. They're hearing it, they're seeing it, they're interacting in some way and getting information. The information is correct, but we cannot verify that what they're seeing is actually what is going on. So the source of psi problem is a chronic epistemological problem that we don't know how to get beyond. And when you look at the whole body of survival research, there's about eight different categories. As you mentioned, past life regression, reincarnation, near-death experience, a whole bunch of others. It strongly suggests that something happens, your body dies, and consciousness persists in some way. We don't know how long, we don't know if it means the personality persists, we don't know any of those things. But something unexpected happens to then figure out, well, what is it? What does happen? We don't know.
And also, the next question would be, does it really matter? Because it's so amazing and great that I personally don't care. You probably, as somebody who studies it, does more, because it would be kind of an interesting thing to figure that out.
Well, I think it does matter. It matters a lot because one of the consequences of the scientific worldview is that it paints a picture of reality as completely nihilistic. There's no purpose to anything. It's all random, basically, and you live and you die, and that's it. And in which case, you can, and I've seen this happen with students when they kind of absorb this doctrine, everything is pointless. Like, why do I need to study for this test? Why do I need to do anything? It's all just going to die and it's all going to go away. Why do anything? Where's the purpose? Well, maybe that's true, right? We're organisms that are self-organizing in some way through the principles of physics, and we gain consciousness by some unknown means, and then we live and then we're dead, and that's the end of it. So that's possible. The survival research suggests that it actually is more than that, but unfortunately, we don't know what it means. We don't know the rest of that story, but at least from a standard scientific materialistic perspective, which is totally nihilistic, there's a crack in the wall there. And the crack is telling us, yeah, a lot of that is correct. It's not completely correct. So yeah, I'm very interested. I'm not concerned about it, but I'm interested in what is that crack trying to tell us about the nature of reality with a large R.
I guess when I was younger, I was a little bit more of the nihilistic kind of worldview, because it's like, oh, nothing means anything. We're all going to die. Who gives a fuck, And then I was like, but there is something else that doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Intellectually, yeah, I could give you all the reasons why that is, but then it just doesn't feel right. And what you're looking at is, what is that feeling and where does that come from? And why are we so intent on finding that and wanting to survive?
Well, it's often said that we live partially by eating food, but we also live by eating meaning. We have to have meaning in our lives. If you have no meaning at all, you wither up and die. So this is the main solution that we have to this point in our history is religion, right? Somebody has a mystical experience, they get an insight, they try to instantiate it in some way. It always turns into a religion, and people gravitate to it because it offers an answer. Well, as a scientist, I'm agnostic about religion. I believe in things that I can test for myself, or at least read about somebody else had tested in some way that we can verify that it's so. So I'm not satisfied with religious answers. I completely understand why people are drawn to it, but it's not good enough for me. So I take this different route where I will bring somebody into the laboratory and we get asked really tiny little questions that are relevant to these kinds of issues. And we get really tiny little answers. But when you accumulate all of them, you start to get a different picture of reality. It's not simply materialistic, it's something else. And I hesitate to use the word spiritual because if you ask 1,000 people what that means, you'll get 1,000 different answers. It means not quite materialistic. That's what it means.
That's one of those buzzwords that can send people off into all kinds of directions, and there's no consensus. So you're right. It is a little bit dangerous to say that. I've always felt like I wanted to go back to the source of where I came from. Like that was the circle of my life, that I came from this source of unknowing, of energy, and I'm going to get to my next question, which is, and then I wanted to go back to it. And the essence of what that source is, and I want to talk about this for a second, is love. I have this feeling, this instinct that I've had my whole life, that there's a goodness and a love to the universe. I can't tell you where that comes from, but it feels so right to me. And how, it's that's what it's made of. That unseen thing is made of that. And I don't even know what that is exactly, but I feel it. And when I feel it, it feels right. How do you study love? How do you study that feeling, that thing that it takes a lot of different forms, but it feels like the universe comes from that?
Of course, every mystical tradition says exactly what you just said.
I thought I came up with it myself.
Well, you're part of this long lineage going back.
Oh man, I'm not as smart as I thought.
No, it's God is love, reality is love.
Yeah, exactly. But I've always had that sense that there's something right about just being.
One of the ways that we've studied this issue about love, at least, was years ago. I forget how many, 20 or 30 years ago. The study of love was not a thing. Like nobody in academia was studying. Well, why would you want to even study that? But we funded people who were interested in what are the health effects of love and the health effects of gratefulness and similar emotions. It turns out that they're extremely important. Now, it's a big thing in academic medicine, at least, that feelings of love and gratefulness and empathy and compassion and all that are important for our health, mental and physical health. So this is not answering your question. You're asking the ultimate questions of what is it really? Well, so you can make metaphors like love is a feeling of being attracted, to want to be with something, to be one with something. That sounds sort of like gravity. Gravity is things getting pulled together. We don't understand what gravity is fundamentally. In fact, we don't understand any physics at a very fundamental level. Why is it so that we have gravity, or we have charge, or we have anything? So you're asking a question that we don't know how to answer yet, which from a scientific perspective is great. We want a long list of questions of, what's next? Because I'm going to finish this paper today and it's going to get published. Well, then what do I do? Well, the truth is there's an endless series of questions that all of which are very interesting. And the one you're asking now, I think we will need to be around as some sort of a species, intelligent species, for maybe another billion years. And then we'll have enough tools and knowledge to be able to even begin to answer that question.
Yeah, it feels like there's something that's going to take a lot of evolution to find.
Well, Homo sapiens cannot do it.
I don't
We,
think so.
I mean, we're slightly clever monkeys. That's basically what it is.
I know. I feel like a pea brain when I think about this stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm just like, this is just too vague. I used to freak myself out when I was younger, just like trying to think about it and then go, stop.
No, it makes your brain hurt. And so the feeling that I get oftentimes is when I try to explain quantum mechanics to my dog. So my dog will give me that look. He's very interested. He probably thinks I'm talking about giving him a bone or a treat or something, and that's why he's interested. But he has no concept of what I'm talking about. And by the same token, the answer to your question, we would have no way of even understanding it from a conceptual level, I think. So we need to be a different, evolve into Homo superior, times 20 or something, to get to the point where we'd be able to even understand the answer. So the experience, the mystical experience is there. Explaining that, I think, requires something a lot bigger than what's here. It's something larger.
Yeah, it's been talked about as that for which there are no words. So, and that's how I would describe it. Is I can't describe it.
Yeah, so it is a paradox that ineffable mystical experiences have been written about, probably the most of any kind of written material in history. Right? You have an experience and then you feel compelled to share it with other people, and you can only do that through words. So billions upon trillions of words have been written to express something that is not expressible.
Quite the dilemma for us humans walking around wanting more and connection to something. How do you feel that the work that you're doing at the Institute of Noetic Sciences is helping us as a species? Other than discovering these things, has there been any, I hate to use this word, practical applications to better people's lives?
We do have a division or department of experience, most of which is related to mental and physical health. So our institute was one of the first to fund research on the health effects of meditation. I've already mentioned gratefulness and love and so on. So those are the primary ways of seeing applications of the kind of work that we do. That on the research side, some of it is related to health. Like we just finished a big study on energy medicine. These are psychic healers and other kinds of healers who are doing something. We don't completely understand what, but we were able to show that it made a significant beneficial change. So we're trying to understand that. That's very practical. My own interests are more along the lines of the physics of what's going on. It's the physics that is somewhere halfway between psychology and physics as it's understood in the academic world. There's a space between those two. Mm-hmm. That's where I'm looking at what is that relationship like. And so my work at this stage does not have an immediate practical application. It's more about developing knowledge about what is the relationship between subjective and objective. How does that work? Where does it come from? Those kinds of questions.
Well, I see it as being practical in that if we're able to change the way people relate to each other, so people can connect in a way that they're not, then perhaps that's where it is, because that might be one of the biggest issues there is that communicating with other people is just not there yet.
The other big chunk of this, though, is the nature of consciousness itself. Mm-hmm. Because our awareness is the only thing, by definition, that we will ever know. Everything we know, everything we perceive, all of that devolves back into understanding the nature of what consciousness is. In fact, everything about the outside world, everything we know in science, all of it is an inference. It's a subjective inference because you can only know the world through your awareness. So it would behoove us to better understand consciousness. Mm-hmm. What that means from a practical perspective is a story that one of our former presidents used to say. And that is that you're walking along somewhere, you come along a stream, and you see babies in the stream floating downstream. This is not a good thing. So the compassionate thing to do, and which is done by most philanthropy today, is to jump into the water and save the babies. It's like an immediate thing. We need to save this. We have a slightly different approach. Our approach is to go upstream and find out, why did the babies get in there in the first place? So this is like the difference between practical research and pure research.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we're concerned about what's happening in front of our eyes, but we're going upstream to try to figure out, well, why is that happening in the first place? And a case can be made that in order to answer that question, we need to understand ourselves a whole lot better.
Mm-hmm.
That means we need to understand the nature of consciousness a lot better.
I wrote down a couple more questions that I had. I hope I can. Oh yeah, I was really interested in your laboratory. I saw some photos that you had posted, probably in one of your videos, about this huge metal steel door and this completely sealed environment. So there would be no way for information, basically, of any kind to get into this room. And then you were doing experiments with seeing if receivers and people could receive messages.
Right.
That was amazing.
That's in the military world, it's called a skiff, a special shielded compartmentalized location.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a commercial box. We bought this box. It's the same type of thing you would get if you were making equipment that had radio frequency emissions, like cell phones and lots of other stuff, because it's solid steel walls and ceiling and floor. It's double walled, double solid steel, and then grounded. And then has this fancy door, as you saw in the video, that when you close it, it sucks the door in. So you're inside a metal box. You can measure then how much of the outside electromagnetic world gets inside. And the answer is that at roughly 10 kilohertz and above, from an electromagnetic perspective, is gone, completely silent. 10 kilohertz and below, you're dealing now with very long radio waves, and some of that can get through. The only place you can go to get rid of it completely is something like 1,000 meters below the ocean. That'll block it. But for most of the modern world is higher frequencies. They're well above 10 kilohertz. And so to block out all communications of the modern world, this box will do it. So we put people in there because among other things, we want to make sure that they're not communicating by cell phones or some other surreptitious radio waves or something like that. But also, when you go into a box like that, most people, especially if you've never been in one before, it feels quiet. And in fact, it is quiet because most of the time we're getting hit by Wi-Fi and all kinds of emissions, and we're not consciously aware of it. But the moment it goes away, it internally feels very, very quiet. And it's not acoustically shielded, but it feels that way.
The experiment that you were talking about, you had people, you changed their brain by covering their eyes and putting white noise into their ears, and so they would like hallucinate almost, right? Is that
that's called the Gansfeld telepathy experiment?
How do I get to do that? I want to try that.
You get a mask. Well, actually, in that classic experiment it's a telepathy experiment. You put the receiver of telepathic information inside the shielded chamber. You then get a ping pong ball and you cut it in half and you tape each half over an eye, and you tell the person to keep their eyes open, and you shine a red light in their face. And if you do that, anybody can do that at home. You just need a ping pong ball and a red light. And you sit in a comfy chair and you put on headphones that play white noise. You will begin to hallucinate after about 5 to 10 minutes. If you want a cheap hallucinatory high,
I do.
That's the way to do it. Yeah, and it's done because in that state, your eyes are open, you're awake. It's not sensory deprivation. You're getting stimulated in your eyes, you get stimulated in your ears, and so on. So you're fully awake, but you're not seeing anything. And the brain gets tired after a while and wants to see stuff. So you'll get put into a hypnagogic state pretty quickly. And some people will hear things and they'll see things. And that's by design. We want the receiver in this experiment to be very, very sensitive to anything that might be coming in from wherever. And so in this case, the information coming in is from a distant person who is asked to mentally send a message.
Now, here's an odd question. You know the phrase women's intuition? You never hear about men's intuition in terms of regular, conversation. Have you discovered in any of your studies that women are more tuned to some of these things?
Not necessarily. No.
Okay.
The only place where you see a bit of a gender difference is in precognition tests. So it maybe that's where the women's intuition comes from, but men do just as well in many of these tests as women. The main difference might be cultural conditioning. That it's okay for women to be that way, like be more emotional and feel emotions, express emotions, and so on. I think that's what it is because of the really talented psychics that I know, especially among remote viewers.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them are men, not all by any means, but many men. And among mediums, most are women. Now, again, it's very difficult to separate here that I know some men who are mediums who are exceptionally good, and the same for women who are remote viewers. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but there's something about the different way that the skills express that seem to attract more men or attract more women. And so we don't understand whether it's really a genetic difference or not.
Yeah, I just know from my own marriage, my wife is far more intuitive than I am. I mean, sometimes she'll say something's going on with, one of my kids, and literally the next day we'll find out that is the truth.
Right. So some of that then is about what the connection is.
Yes.
So the mother-child connection is extremely strong. Men might be more intuitive on things about danger. Like there's danger coming around the corner because traditionally that's the man's role. So these roles might be simply due to culture, except that we are doing an experiment looking at a genetic basis for psychic ability. And we have found something that is a genetic basis. The study only involved women. We were looking for men or women, but it just turned out that the people who we found we got the DNA from to look at their genome, they all were women. So at least among the women that we found, their DNA suggests a different genetic structure than women who are matched who don't report anything about any psychic abilities.
I remember reading about some woman who said she had learned a lot of these skills from her grandmother. Her grandmother had noticed in her these abilities, and she had kept it a secret, but the grandmother went, come on over here. I do this too. And she helped her.
Yeah. Every culture in the world throughout history has said that some families have this special sauce. And so we found people who come from families that are psychic and felt that they also were psychic, and we vetted them for actual talent, got their DNA, did the full genome, and compared it against the normal population and also matched controls, and there is a difference.
And what genes are different? Is there a certain area that the genes would be different?
It is a gene on chromosome number 7.
Okay.
It is, when we talk about, if you go to 23andMe or one of the gene testing sites, they're looking at what's called the exome. So two types of genes that are going on in your body. The exome is the part that produces proteins. So we're constructed out of proteins, and that's why a lot of emphasis is based on that. But that's only 4 to 5% of your DNA. 95% of your DNA does not code for proteins. It used to be called junk DNA because people didn't know what it was for. Now we're getting a little more clever and realizing that there's this other huge portion of our DNA that doesn't code for proteins is called the intron. That there's the exome and the intron. So the intron part of the DNA is where we found this difference. It looks as though that it's related to how genes express, right? If you look at the strand of DNA and you sort of layer it out, you find pieces of exome codes for protein, and then you have a piece that doesn't code for protein. It's like glue that holds it together. That's the intron. And then you find another exome and more intron and an exome. So it's an intron sequence. It's between coding. That's where we found the difference. What that suggests, among other things, is there probably are a lot of biological markers for psychic talent. And many years ago, and as part of the government's Stargate program, which is looking at this sort of thing for psychic espionage, everything that was known about medicine at the time and psychology was used to try to distinguish between somebody who would be a really good remote viewer and somebody who wouldn't. Because the idea was, well, how do we get a lot of more talented people? And everything known at the time, this is the 1980s, could find nothing different between the super talented psychics and the ones who were not talented. There was no difference at all. Maybe a few personality differences, but nothing medical. Well, we didn't have the tools that we have now. And so we're still at the beginning stages of understanding genetics, and we already are finding there's a difference. There's also probably morphological differences in the brain. The brain has different structures and different connections. I can project another century or so where we will learn very specifically why one person has not only psychic talent, but why this person is way more intelligent, and this one has much more emotional intelligence, and this one is a great sports star and all that. We'll understand that at a much deeper level in a while.
I hope it's not misused. That's what I really hope.
Oh yeah, no, the opportunity for eugenics and manipulation is huge. So fortunately, there are bioethicists who are keeping tabs of this and keeping it as straight and narrow as we can get. The problem is that the genie's out of the bottle already. So if you want to have children who are smarter, faster, have better eyes and more hair, you could do that today. And so you can just guess what's going to happen 20 to 30 years from today.
Yeah. Well, I got a little creeped out just on the phrase psychic espionage.
But no, that's old news.
I know. But it's scary.
Yeah. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why this as a topic has always been considered controversial and suppressed, because it's creepy. Right? It's kind of scary to think that, well, what do you mean people can kind of pick up what I'm thinking or feeling from a distance without my knowledge? It's the same thing why there's a lot of emphasis now on privacy and the internet.
Mm-hmm.
There is no privacy on the internet. We make a big deal of it, and you can press buttons and say, don't do this, but who knows what's going on? This realm is much worse because it means that there are literally no secrets in the past, the present, or the future. So nothing is secret anymore, not just the internet, but literally anything. So that's what, for obvious reasons, the intelligence world was interested in that, because we'd like to know what's going on somewhere else. It doesn't work well enough at this point to put $1 trillion into it, but from a practical perspective, are there people who are really good at doing these things? The answer is yeah.
I wonder if we can start to discover where things like compassion and kindness come from and up those factors and push down the other ones.
You can do that, actually. Empathy in particular is when you start looking at the neuroanatomy and seeing how portions of the brain are connected. There's a big, big difference between somebody who's a psychopath and somebody who's highly empathetic. And so we know enough, even now, it's still at a relatively early stage, that it would be possible to construct, to build somebody. You take somebody and you can start changing the way that the brain is connected to make them highly compassionate and empathetic, or to make them into a psychopathic killer. So we sort of do that anyway. We've done that for throughout history in the same way that we breed new dogs. That if you put somebody into training to become a Navy SEAL, for example, they're not normal anymore. They're certainly, by comparison to the general population, they're not normal. They're shaped physically, and they have to come in already kind of predisposed in that way. So, I mean, there is no normal. Our average person, there's probably 1,000 different predilections, little subclasses of people, and they tend to end up, if they're lucky, in the profession that they're suited for. And you learn very quickly that if you are not suited for a given profession, you're not going to succeed, and you'll go out and do something else.
Well, it's amazing work that you're doing. My mind is trying to wrap my head around all this stuff a little bit. It's daunting to me. I know you do this stuff every day, so it's probably, not quite as much as but I actually feel like my brain is being expanded by talking about this stuff, because I don't get to do that often.
If we started talking about precognition, like perception through time, you'll find that you get a very particular kind of headache after a while, because it really starts screwing with your mind, that thinking about causation going in one direction and retrocausation coming backwards, and yet this is real. It's not good for mental health sometimes. I mean, I'm used to it, so we all get used to our own poison, so it's not a big deal for me. But
I was going to ask you just go home and scream in a pillow at the end of the day.
I am home.
Yeah, that's true.
We're all home now, so we don't go anywhere.
Well, in the old days when you went to the office in the lab, and do you ever have those days where you just, and this is a little more of a personal question, where you just go, I can't even take any more of this in?
Oftentimes we'll get to a point where we're working on something and we don't know how to solve a problem, especially analytical problems. Like we get stuck and we say, I don't know what to do with this anymore. So you go to sleep and the next day, let's try this. And so, I mean, that happens all the time, but that's part of the fun too, right? That science is the puzzle of trying to understand, asking questions of the universe. The universe will always give you back an answer, usually exactly the answer that you were asking, but most of the time we're not asking the right question. So it's constantly back and forth all the time. And for me, it's fun. That's what I like to do.
So when you hit a wall, you just relax and you trust that it's going to come, and then it does.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about, I know in this other interview I saw, you talked about being a violin player and then going into the field that you're in now, and having these experiences where you associated colors with different musical notes.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a similar experience, not with color, but playing music with smell, where I had a certain type of, and I would call it a primal smell, when I was playing when I was in the music in a way that was very lost in the music. And
what did it smell like?
Sort of like musky, like
Patchouli?
primal, huh?
Patchouli?
Not patchouli. It was more earthy, like dirt, and maybe like a horse smell almost, or like a animal of some kind with manure and a cave. I'm just picking imagery to try to go with this smell, but it felt very ancient, and it felt like, oh man, I'm really it's only happened a couple of times, and I thought, wow, I'm tapped into something here, where the music is taking me somewhere that is like important and real, more real than in the moments before. And I thought, and then I had this idea of like, am I actually playing this music, or does this music already exist in the universe and I'm just tapping into it? And that was a sort of a switch it was like an ego switch almost. Like maybe even the best musicians aren't really great. They're great. What they're great at is tapping into the music that already exists and sort of decoding a certain pattern.
Egocentric question is, am I playing this music? The flip is the music playing me? And the same is said of authors who sometimes get into a kind of a zone when they're writing. And the question is, am I writing this story, or is the story writing me?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've experienced both feelings.
Mhm.
I like the when the art does you rather than the other way around.
Yeah. No, well, my dad was an artist for his whole working career, and often would say that when he would get, especially in sculpture, he felt disassociated from his hands. His hands were making the sculpture. It wasn't him anymore. He would like watch it in amazement as something would come out of clay, which is what his primary medium was. And I've heard that from other artists as well, that you are the thing somehow. You become one with it.
I wonder if that's why there's some sort of a disdain for the arts on the part of people that don't understand it. It's like they know there's something like really important and profound there, and it scares them because they can't tap into it themselves. So they have a little bit of a disdain for it.
Yeah, for people who really want to be in control all the time, it could be scary, right? You're not, and none of us are in as much control as we think we are or would like to be. So you have to go with the flow.
How many people work at the institute?
We have about 30 on staff. It's a little bit less now because we also have a retreat center, and that had to close because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Um, but on average, before the pandemic, between probably 30 and 45. Some of which were involved in the running of the retreat center itself.
And the retreat center was for the people that work there, or for people to visit and do some sort of work?
We bought a property which used to be a university, and turned it into a retreat center where people would do workshops.
Oh,
So
okay.
either people would come to us who were a workshop leader and they would just rent the space, or sometimes we would give our own workshops. And then there was enough space for 120 people or so to stay on campus.
Oh, I love that. I hope that comes back because I want to go to a workshop.
Yeah. Yeah, we hope it comes back too. I mean,
Yeah.
eventually it will, but we don't know when.
Well, exactly. That's everything, right?
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for your time and really and talking to me today. I have to admit I was a little intimidated after I had seen your talks. I went, I hope I can keep up with this guy. And
Just a guy.
yeah, you are just a guy, and very genuine, and I appreciate that. And I've learned quite a bit. And I think what's going to happen after this is I'm going to walk around and have to shake off my intensity of my brain for this one.
No, see, when you think these deep thoughts,
Mhm.
it burns hair away. Yeah, so you can kind of tell immediately. So this is a deep thinker here,
The
because
bald man.
it's just blasting it off. It's
Yes, it's your brain is pushing out the hair follicles, and
Yeah.
we're two bald men. If you're just listening to this, but that's because it is an audio podcast.
Oh,
I might
Yeah.
use a little of the video for a promotion, but it's just so great to talk to you. Good luck with everything you're doing. Keep it up, man. It's really important stuff that you're doing, and I'm very very happy to have gotten to talk to you. Really, really great talk. I'm absolutely thrilled. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Dean. You have a great day. Appreciate your time. Well, thank you, folks, for listening to The Exploding Human. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Check out my website, theexplodinghuman.com, and check out the herosoapcompany.com. If you type in the word exploding at the end of your checkout there, you will get a discount. These are amazingly natural soaps infused with essential oils. I love them. They're great. And a portion of their profits does go to helping homeless veterans. Great cause. Again, thanks for listening. Much appreciated. Have a great day. Thanks.